In the old houses of Bacolod, people say strange things occur during sleep, small, quiet anomalies that are easily ignored until they fester into something malignant. The man, a creature of rigid routine, lived by the clock, work, eat, sleep. He dismissed the local whispers as mere folklore, the superstitions of an older generation. That was until the morning that shattered his normalcy. As the dawn light sliced through his bedroom, he reached beneath his pillow. Instead of the familiar softness of cotton, his fingers met something ice-cold and heavy. He pulled it out. A coin. It was thick, profoundly tarnished to a near-black hue, with jagged, unrecognizable symbols etched into its surface. He had absolutely no memory of it, nor could he fathom how it appeared under his head in the night. It was an intrusion, a cold, metallic puzzle, waiting in the quiet of his morning. Later, walking through his living room, his gaze drifted to the framed family portrait on the mantel. A vibrant memory of summer and laughter. A faint, smudged blur now obscured his youngest child's face, a ghostly haze where sharp features should have been. He leaned closer, squinting, his breath catching. Had the photo always been like that? Or was something impossible beginning to rewrite his history? The next morning, the smudge on the portrait had darkened, spreading like a sickness. Desperate for grounding, he summoned a relative. They stood together, staring at the frame. "It's smudged," she murmured, her voice trembling. "It looks like the image is rotting." He pulled out an older photograph, a snapshot from a summer picnic, needing to prove it was an isolated incident. But as they looked, a hollow silence filled the room. A gap existed in the crowd, a space where a person should have been. "Who was in this spot?" he asked, pointing to the empty air. The relative squinted, her brow furrowing in genuine agony. She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to a haunting blank vacancy. I don't know," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I feel like I should know, but there's nothing, just an empty space." He flipped the photo over, his hands shaking. On the back, written in faded, trembling ink, were 3 words: "Return the token." The realization hit them both with cold clarity. This wasn't just physical decay. The person had been surgically excised from the photograph, and more terrifyingly, they were being erased from their very memories. The house felt smaller, the air tighter, as if the walls themselves were hungry for more pieces of their history. He couldn't take it anymore. The coin was a weight in his gut, a parasite in his home. He snatched it from under his pillow and flung it out the open window into the dark, tangled garden. He watched it disappear into the weeds, then collapsed into bed, trembling, hoping against hope that he had severed the connection. But at dawn, the familiar, metallic pressure beneath his head returned. The coin was back, his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He sat up and frantically searched online for the strange, jagged symbols etched into the metal. The results were chillingly sparse, hidden in the darkest corners of local history forums, but every archived warning was the same: "Do not keep it overnight." The screen flickered violently, and the room turned hostile. He reached for his glass of water to steady his nerves, and it didn't just break, it disintegrated. The shards didn't scatter randomly. They settled into a precise geometric pattern of triangles and rhombuses across the floor. Then, beneath the static, a low, rhythmic chant began to pulse, a garbled, inhuman language that seemed to vibrate within his very marrow. The house was no longer a home, it was a ritual site. A friend, sensing the frantic terror in his voice during their last conversation, drove over to check on him. She pulled up to his house, but the atmosphere was suffocating. She picked up her phone and dialed his number. As it rang, she looked through the living room window. She saw him standing there, completely motionless, his back to the door. He picked up the phone. "I'm here," he said, his voice sounding flat, robotic, and distant. But through the glass, she saw his lips weren't moving. He didn't even acknowledge the phone in his hand. He was staring at the wall. She froze, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. Something was puppeteering his body, using his voice to lure her into the trap. The air around the house pushed against her, an invisible wall of pure, unadulterated malice. She spun the car around and fled, her heart hammering in her chest. Inside, the man remained a statue, while in the corner of the room, a dark, viscous pool began to spread across the floor. It was stagnant, black as oil, and smelled of earth and old burials. The house had become an intelligent, predatory organism. A permanent, bone-deep chill had settled under his skin, one that no blanket or fire could reach. That morning he discovered a thin, black line snaking across his palm. It wasn't a bruise or an ink stain. It was a vein, pulsing with a rhythmic, sickly blackness as it slowly crawled up his forearm. He felt a faint, crawling sensation, as if something were moving beneath his skin. He rushed to the mirror, desperate for confirmation that he was still himself. He raised his hand to his face, but his reflection didn't follow instantly. There was a fraction of a second, a sickening, unnatural lag, before his mirrored self moved. The copy stared back with a delayed, hollow gaze, shifting just moments after he did. He touched his cheek, and his reflection's hand met its own face with a stuttered, rhythmic delay. Panic surged through him, but his mirrored self remained eerily calm. He wasn't looking at a reflection anymore. He was looking at an imitation, an empty vessel, that was slowly learning how to wear his skin. Every movement he made felt like a struggle against the delay, as if his physical body was being slowly outpaced by the entity growing inside him. He was a prisoner in his own reflection. He needed evidence. He held up his phone, aiming the camera at the dark, sprawling network on his arm. The screen didn't show his skin. It erupted into a violent blizzard of static, a soundless visual roar that blinded the device. The technology, much like his own sense of self, was failing, corrupted by the encroaching abnormality that now defined his existence. The house had grown even more perverse. When he moved, the shadows cast by the furniture refused to follow. They lingered on the wall, stretched and distorted, detaching themselves from the objects that created them. They pooled and rippled like spilled ink, sluggish and independent, as if they possessed their own dark intent. The rooms felt sticky, as if time itself were being consumed by the darkness, slowing to a crawl, until only the shadows remained, pulsing with a life of their own. He watched in horror as a shadow cast by his own chair detached and slid across the carpet toward the pool of black water. The boundaries of the physical world were dissolving. He felt the light in the room dimmed, not by the sun, but by the hunger of the shadows gathering in the corners. He clutched his family album like a final lifeline, desperate to remember who he was. He flipped through the pages, but the familiarity was gone. The settings were the same. The park, the festival in Bacolod, but the people in the photos had been replaced. Strangers with smooth, placid faces and dead black eyes stared back at him from the glossy paper. They wore his family's clothes and stood in his family's home, but they were utter impostors, and in every single photo, lurking in the blurred background or standing just behind the group, was the same man, gaunt, pale, and holding the exact same tarnished coin. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to summon the memory of his mother's smile or his father's eyes, but the mental image was dissolving into a gray, suffocating fog. His history was being systematically scrubbed by this spectral figure, rewritten one page at a time. The impostors were smiling, but their eyes held the same void he saw in his own reflection. He realized with a jolt of terror. He lunged for the front door, desperate to flee. He burst into the night, sprinting down the rain-slicked asphalt. He took a left, then a right, but the scenery never changed. The same desolate curb, the same oppressive, hazy glow. Each time he circled back to his house, the number on the front door had changed. It started at 40, then 39, then 38. With every loop, the numbers ticked downward, a countdown toward an inevitable, unknown destination. He retreated inside, gasping for air, only to find the pool of black water in his living room was no longer silent. It was churning. From the center, sibilant whispers emerged, forming his name in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. The house was closing in, and the number on the door was already at 5. He looked at his hands. They were fading, turning into the same gray, indistinct texture as the blurred faces in his photos. The whispers grew louder, chanting his name in unison, promising him a place in the void. He was no longer running from the house. The walls pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't his, and the floorboards beneath his feet felt like soft, decaying skin. The black veins were no longer just lines. They were a thick, pulsing web that had consumed his chest and throat. His skin felt like cold, calcified stone. He was becoming a shell, an empty vessel waiting to be filled by the darkness. He couldn't scream. His throat was filled with the metallic taste of the coin. He couldn't avoid the mirrors anymore. Everywhere he looked, windows, screens, polished wood, his reflection was shifting. His features were smoothing over, erased as if by an invisible, relentless hand. He stared at the glass, watching as his face dissolved into a blank, featureless void, an abyss of absolute nothingness. He was being completely overwritten. The man he used to be was gone, replaced by a monument to absence. The door number was now 1. He felt his consciousness stretching, thinning out, until he was just a whisper in the wind. The void in the mirror began to move on its own, tilting its head, mimicking the movements of the house itself. He was no longer a person. He was a footnote in the history of the coin. When they finally breached the house, the door number was gone, leaving only a blank wooden frame. The air inside felt heavy, frozen in a state of suspended eternal decay. A deafening, rhythmic chanting vibrated through the floorboards. Though the rooms were entirely empty of life, they found him in the living room, transformed into a statue of dark, veiny, petrified wood. His eyes were dull stones, staring at nothing, and fused into the center of his rigid, stony palm was the tarnished coin, the anchor of his final total erasure. The photographs on the walls were nothing but sheets of blinding, empty white. His legacy was gone. His history was erased from the world. But as the investigators backed away in sheer horror, the camera panned to a different city, a different home. On a nightstand, a young woman slept peacefully, completely unaware of the approaching darkness. Beneath her pillow, a faint metallic glint caught the morning light, a new, tarnished coin, waiting patiently for her to wake up, and the chanting faded, replaced by the soft, rhythmic sound of her breathing. As the coin began to warm, pulsing with the hunger of 1,000 erased lives, equals 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 equals